Morning, dear friends. Welcome. It's Tuesday. Yes, we skipped yesterday, Monday. It is Tuesday, the 15th of Sivan, the 14th of June. And welcome back. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Right now, Masechet Shabbat, chapter 16, 121a, Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Just to give you a fast refresher of what we talked about last time. Today we're going to a new Mishnah and an entirely new discussion, just to keep our train of thought and to connect one class to the past. The previous one, we were talking about, well, the last discussion was comparing the indirectly extinguishing fire, possibly to the indirect washing off of God's name. We had a debate if you have to cover up Hashem's name if it's on your skin. Initially understanding that it was talking about erasing, eventually understanding that it was more about modesty and putting a barrier between Hashem's name and a person's uncovered body, which led us lastly to an interesting discovery, which we didn't have the chance to spend too much time, which is that there was an apparent contradiction between a Rabbi Yossi, who says that tefillah bismana, mitzvah, that to go to the mikvah at the time when one is a candidate to go to the mikvah for purification, then that's a mitzvah that one should do, even if they might not be able to cover up Hashem's name. There was another Rabbi Yossi who says that there is absolutely no mitzvah. And the Gemara answers, and it's not just, I want to clarify, it's not just like a cheap answer. There's two Rabbi Yossis. The Gemara clarifies by exploring the two texts that they're really not the same Rabbi Yossi. There are actually more than one Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara. One was Rabbi Yossi bar Chalafta. He is the commonly quoted Rabbi Yossi, one of the pillars of the Mishnah. And then the other Rabbi Yossi, who was brought in parenthetically from a later Brisa, was Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda, a different person who was actually well known that to have a different specific position in regards to toiveling in the right time. I'm going to disappoint the drop, but I don't want to. I want to avoid. We connected our discussion about washing off a written name of Hashem to the question of erasing Hashem's name. I'm sorry, erasing or whatever you call it, dimming, lasering a tattoo with Hashem's name. I found when we spoke about it on Friday, a teshuvah, one of the responses. Unfortunately, I had it open in a window and it closed, and I wasn't able to find it in a timely way. So I'm going to disappoint you by not going through that tshuva at length. But if I recall correctly, and I think as I mentioned already before, there were varying opinions about the permissibility of erasing Hashem's name. I think I remember I was surprised to see there are possibly those poskim who did permit erasing Hashem's name with a tattoo under certain criteria for certain reasons, but I believe that the prevailing viewpoint would probably be not to touch it. But again, I have to go find that teshuvah, and then we can maybe discuss. But now I want to jump into
Let me ask you a question. The prohibition of tattooing is deoraita.
Correct.
The erasure, I would assume, is the Rabbanan.
No. Again, I want to remind you, there's two questions. Question one is, can you erase, the word's not really erase, can you, whatever you do to a tattoo, can you do that?
Mechikat Hashem, but that's a question of Mechikat Hashem.
I'm sorry?
It's a question of Mechikat Hashem.
Erasing Hashem's name is midoraita.
What?
Erasing Hashem's name is midoraita.
Midoraita, okay. So my question is moot.
Which is why the prevailing viewpoint would be to prohibit, unless there were certain, maybe even I don't remember the rationale for an opinion that would permit it. I may even be wrong. Maybe no one permits it. Maybe I was mixing up two different teshuvot. That's why such a heavy topic. I'd rather share it with you from the original text of the teshuvah. But again, in a more broad discussion, not every halachic authority even agrees that one should undo any tattoo, because I guess there's two or three ways to remove a tattoo. Once upon a time, you may have had no choice. I mean, what is no choice? tattoo removal may have meant literally removing several layers of skin and like literally cutting out the tattoo within the layer of the skin with pigment. That sounds extremely unsafe, unhealthy, and painful. And then you have today with laser, they basically scar the skin in a way, and the laser, I guess, dims the pigment. So the first question is one allowed to scar their skin in the manner that the laser scars the skin? And so it's possible that what you're doing by lasering the tattoo is you're actually doing two wrongs. The person already has the tattoo, maybe they didn't know better, but now in the process of doing teshuvah, it's possible, depending on how you classify the using the laser, as an additional prohibited action of lasering the skin. So not everyone says that, but there is a perspective, as I recall, that says. So again, a complex topic. In the time of the Gemara, obviously, they did not have the ability to laser. Now, another thing that people do, you have sometimes people that, not Jewish people, that have tattoos, let's say of a swastika or some other very shameful.
We lost you. We lost you, Rabbi.
Testing.
You were frozen for a while.
All right, give me 1 second. Let me check what's going on with my internet, and then, is it better now?
Yeah, it's fine now.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but I got a notice that my internet was unstable, whatever that means. Backing up. How far back? What was I saying when I got knocked off?
The scar from the laser.
Oh, yeah. So when the way they laser the tattoo is that the way they remove a tattoo or dim a tattoo is they apply this laser, and it has the effect of dimming the pigment of the ink and also dimming the general pigment of the skin. And so really that process also scars the skin. And so there are those who say that one would not be permitted to do that to their skin. And I was saying for a non-Jewish person who has a very shameful tattoo, thinking of a person that has a swastika or some other very offensive imagery. So you might have the option, not a Jewish person, to laser it off. And then sometimes there's artists that will reimagine and, cover it up. Obviously that's not an option for a Jewish person. And look, as has been pointed out, there are many people that are Bali Teshuvah that embrace their Yiddish Jewish heritage, or they convert to Judaism and they already have tattoos. And if you go to Yerushalayim, if you go anywhere, but I'm just saying you can go to Yerushalayim to like the Mea Sharim, and in the mikveh, you might notice there are people, because Jerusalem has a lot of Bali Teshuvah, can I know her, people with very interesting, tattoos, and generally they make the effort to hide them because it's not really in style. And you don't find necessarily among those many people an attempt to erase the tattoos. And maybe the reason is because their halachic authorities don't permit it. So anyways, an interesting topic. We'll close it out for now. There's obviously a lot of contemporary halachic literature on the subject. And maybe what I saw, and then we'll close out this unit, maybe what I saw is that if a person was removing the entire skin, although generally a person is not allowed to mutilate themselves unnecessarily either, maybe there was leniency because you're not actually erasing God's name, you're kind of severing, removing. Again, that's kind of gruesome, and I'm not advocating doing that, but maybe there was some leniency in that regards because they weren't erasing Hashem's name. So long story short, we need to revisit that. And now let's share the screen and go into a new segment of the Talmud. Well, not a new segment, a new Mishnah rather. And I think you'll find this Gemara very delightful and straightforward. And welcome on board. Here we go. Of course, dedicating our learning for the well-being of our dear members of our Chabur. So until now, we've been talking about a fire breaks out in a Jewish home. What is the Jewish homeowner permitted to do? What can he salvage? How may he salvage it? We talked briefly about certain fire mitigation that might be allowed during a fire. You may be able to place certain items in the way to block, to hinder, to slow the fire. One is obviously not permitted to actually extinguish the fire. Now we're going to move on to the next step of this progression, which is, what do you do with a Gentile? Can you tell a Gentile to put out the fire? May one allow a Gentile to put out the fire? Is there somewhere in between? And that's what this Mishnah and our Gemara is going to discuss. The fire department arrives. Or there's a fire and your neighbor comes over with a fire extinguisher. One is not permitted to say, hey, please put out the fire, nor should one say, don't put out the fire. Why should you not give any instruction? It's simple reading to a Gentile regarding putting out the fire. We are not responsible to ensure that he observes Shabbos. We have no obligation to insist he observe Shabbos, but we also don't have the right to tell him what to do. Let's see Rashi. Rabbanon gazru alamira lenachri mishum shavus. Why can't you tell him to put out the fire? So
Rabbi,
Rashi reminds us that our sages made a gzera not to instruct a Gentile to desecrate Shabbos.
Rabbi,
Yes, Rabbi.
I'm trying to think. There's a fire. The guys come. You think?
Hold on. No. My advice: let's see the whole thing before we start getting into the hypotheticals, because maybe the Mishnah itself will respond, or the Gemara will immediately respond to. But give me a second, then we'll. So, because we don't understand what the Mishnah is saying, we're reading it at face value. At face value, you shouldn't tell a Gentile to put out the fire, because we don't tell Gentiles to desecrate Shabbos. But don't say al techabe, or Rashi's version velo techabe, meaning ein sarich lemchot biyado. You don't need to protest el yanichenu v'yichabe. Allow him to go ahead and do his thing. Aval katan shabal lechabah. He's a child, a youngster, a minor, who's going to put out the fire. Ein shaymin loy. Do not allow him to do so. The Jewish people are obligated to oversee and enforce their youngsters' Shabbos observance. Rashi. No Rashi. Well, actually, let's read this Rashi. It's on an earlier thing. We're not responsible for a Gentile Shabbos observance or none. We're talking, obviously, Shel Nachri Aleim the Yisrael. Or Shel Nachri Aleim. The Yisrael Einay Muzra Shvisasa Shel Nachri Sheinay Avdai. A Jew has no responsibility to enforce or to ensure Gentile Shabbos observance, and even on your behalf, unless he's your slave, which then what he does is your representation. We're not advocating for slavery, but in the time of slavery, one would not be allowed to allow their slave to do Malach on Shabbos. What kind of fire are we talking about? Well, if there's a circumstance that's pikuach nefesh, the Jew is allowed to put it out himself, then obviously the Jew should put it out. So obviously here we're talking about a scenario where, for whatever reason, the halacha does not compel or permit the Jew to put out the fire. And under such circumstances, one may not instruct the Gentile to do so either, but one need not ask them to stop. Now, it is interesting that we don't waive the gzeira of the Chachamim in the case of a fire. You would think that although the Chachamim generally prohibit telling a Gentile to do something, they should maybe give a waiver in the case of fire, but apparently not.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
I'm sorry. I'm still troubled.
But we still haven't. Okay, go ahead.
No, but it says specific beferish shebol lechabos. It's not like a guy's walking in the street. The firemen come, the engines, they're all there. Why would there even be a shiloh? Who's going to say put out the fire? What are they there for?
Because we're imagining in a modern world where the I said it. The fire department arrives. So obviously when the fire department arrives, they're coming to put out the fire. But let's imagine a more ambiguous situation where there's a chaotic scene happening and people start gathering around. And so Gentile comes that may be in the position to put out the fire. Don't mix in positively or negatively. Now, the reason why I asked us to hold comment is because we're going to see the Gemara explains that it's possible that there are other things that one may say to motivate a Gentile to put out fire, but not to give a direct instruction.
No, but,
So
but
that's why
the Mishnah specifically says he came Shebola Chabois. I'm troubled by that.
So you don't tell him. Let him do his thing, but don't cheer him on. Don't say, "Yeah,
Okay.
man, go get it."
Okay, I accept cheer him on is not allowed. Okay,
Wait, what do you
good.
accept? What?
I accept that cheering him on is the problem. Okay.
Something to that effect. Because that would already be possibly blurring the line between allowing, permitting, and having him be your explicit proxy. Yeah, Tosfos underscores that even though what's happening here is really an Isser Derabanan, because they are not prohibited from, they're not prohibited biblically to ask a Gentile to do work for you. You know what, Rebbe Errol, let's indulge the. Actually, no, we're going to go to the halacha after we see our Gemara. I'm Rabbi Ami. So Rabbi Ami helps us explore and probe further. Is there anything you can say? Our Mishnah seems to say like you should tape your mouth shut and don't say a thing. Not positive, not negative. You don't have to stop them, but you can't encourage them. Rabbi Ami says, B'dleika, when you have a fire, Hitiru loymar, you're allowed to say, Kol hamechabe einoi masit. Were anybody to put this fire out, they would not walk away with less money in their pocket. If someone puts out the fire, they're not going to become poorer for it. You're not going to lose out. What are you saying? What are you essentially saying? That you're going to pay them. You're not going to go unrewarded. Your bank account is not going to shrink after putting out the fire. Maybe our Mishnah supports this. How would the Mishnah support this? Our Mishnah says, bite your tongue. Well, let's read it. We should not, or we need not, say the extreme do's and don'ts. The thing that you cannot say is, please go put out that fire. With something a little more ambiguous. You're not telling the guy do it. You're just saying whoever does it will walk away very happy. Rashi, when you say you go put out the fire, halachically, he becomes your agent. He's doing this act explicitly and directly in your representation. But if you say something a little more ambiguous, because then who makes the decision? The Gentile now on his own is choosing to do it. Granted, he's doing it because it's going to be profitable, but it's entirely his own choice, and he has not been instructed to do so. So the Gemara initially says, Rabbi Ami says you can say it's going to be good for you. It's going to be good for your bottom line. We want to see if that's connected to the Mishnah, because the Mishnah just says to avoid the extremes, the do and the don't. But maybe you can say something that's encouraging, but not creating an agency, a relationship, a legal relationship between you and the Gentile. The Gemara says, not going to work. Our Mishnah cannot be read so. Rebel. So ultimately, the Gemara is going to probably support your interpretation of the Mishnah. Initially, the Gemara attempts to read the Mishnah the way I explained it. But the Gemara now is ultimately, if I'm not mistaken, going to take your point. Amos Sefer. Read the latter half of the Mishnah. Al tichabe lo amrinale. You don't have to tell them, don't put out the fire. But something more encouraging also may not be said. You shouldn't tell him, don't put out the fire. But you also shouldn't tell him to put out the fire. The Gemara concludes that our Mishnah does not permit.
Sorry, Rabbi. Isn't it sort of silly to tell him not to put out the fire? First of all, what's wrong with telling him not to put out the fire?
That would be silly. You're going to cause your house, you're going to cause unnecessary suffering and loss. The Gentiles permissibly extinguishing the fire, don't stop him.
What exactly did you do? The damage to the shulchan?
I'm sorry?
What transgression is saying don't put out the fire?
No, it's common sense. The guy's about to put out your fire. Don't stop him. You don't have to stop him. You needn't say stop and you needn't say go. Close your mouth and hope for the best.
No, but what halachic problem do you have with saying don't put out the fire?
It's not a halachic problem. There's no halachic imperative to stop him. We're saying you don't need to, you cannot tell him to do it, but you needn't stop him. The question is, what about the middle ground? And that's more ambiguous.
Rabbi, I have to put my 2 cents in here somewhere.
Go ahead.
In those days, if a fire broke out and the neighbor comes to put it
Let me
out,
just interject. Assume that there is a hypothetical where it would not necessarily lead to death of human life.
okay, so it's a fire that's starting,
Right?
and the neighbor comes by to put it out. What is he going to put it out with? A pail of water?
Whatever
What else could he do?
used in those days. Salt.
How could you put out a fire like that with a pail of water? Secondly,
Wait, how can you, or how can you put out without?
well, it all depends on the fire. You know, if it's just a little fire, you can come over and put it out. But if the house is on fire, how can he put it out? What, is he going to run back and forth with pails of water? It's a joke.
I don't know. I don't know. Whatever technology they would have used.
And the other thing is, in those days,
Wait,
they had
Alan, it's an
horses.
interesting question. You're making me think, but let me ask you a question in return. What would be the difference? Is there a difference what he uses to put out the fire?
Doesn't matter what he uses, whatever he's got to use, he hasn't got, you need huge equipment to put out a fire. You can't just come with a pail or a pail of water. They don't have extinguishers or anything like that.
Okay. Well, I mean,
So-
people used to try to put out fires. In the olden days, they maybe weren't very successful. Certainly in shtetl life, we know they were highly unsuccessful at putting on
Yeah.
fires. That's why so many shtetls have stories of the fire that destroyed a third of the town.
That's right. So secondly,
But I do want to remind you, I'm sorry, hold the thought 1 second. The Talmud's times was not shtetl times. And I think here, this is what I believe is the story, is that ultimately there's more distance placed between homes in the time of the Gemara, I believe, than in shtetl life. I believe so. And so maybe the fire was more containable, possibly. Not necessarily we talk about the fires in your own home, in your chutzner, but there are plausible scenarios where the fire is going to be contained beyond the home that's being afflicted.
well, it didn't look like that when you showed us the photos of the when we had to pass something from one balcony to another.
Correct.
They were very close together.
Correct. That's true.
And
Um,
secondly, the fire department used horses to pull the wagons full of water. So
Okay.
by the time you get the horses together and bridle them up and then attach them to the water system that you've got, and then drive the horses up to the fire, I mean, the only thing they could do is protect the other house.
Well,
So this guy has no say at all.
so this Mishnah is asking us to imagine a scenario where they arrive right away. Maybe there's a fire hydrant nearby, or maybe there's a chest. Maybe there's a how do you call it? A chest full of water, and they're able to just slosh it on. Maybe we're not talking about a professional firefighter. Maybe we're talking about the neighbor next door. So we have to be a little creative and allow ourselves to not imagine the scenarios that don't match with this Mishnah, and instead imagine the details that would make this Mishnah plausible, because there are ways that this Mishnah could work. Fire breaks out. The neighbor is walking by. He smells smoke. He runs into the house. He sees a few buckets of water there, and he's ready to splash on the fire. You say, "Yeah, stop! It's Shabbos," or you say, "Don't stop! It's You can please put out the fire. Or do you just shut your mouth, let him do his thing, and hope for the best? And our Mishnah seems to be saying you close your mouth, you hope for the best, and hopefully it works out.
Well, that's the best scenario.
In this case. Now, ultimately, our Mishnah is a little our Mishnah is vague. Our Mishnah doesn't tell us what to do with the middle language. It's not going to hurt you if you put this fire out, or your bank account's going to get fuller, or you're not going to lose out, which is not saying do it. It's not saying not doing it. It's creating an incentive to put out the fire. Our Mishnah, on one hand, you could infer that you don't tell him to do it, but you could hint. But on the other hand, maybe all you're allowed to do is close your mouth. You don't have to stop them, but you can't say anything. And so the Gemara concludes, our Mishnah does not give us solid proof, halachic proof, that you can make that more ambiguous incentivization for fire to the firefighters.
Actually, if you think about it, saying to someone, if anybody's going to put it out, will not lose. It's basically, if you think about it, by extension, it's like a grama.
Yeah, you're not telling them to do it, but you're certainly creating motivation to do it. They're not doing it at your instruction, but they are encouraged by your promises. And so it's a relationship that's more vague. And maybe under such circumstances, that's not a mira la'akum. Telling a Gentile to do something directly, that's a problem. Alluding to it in a more vague way, maybe under the circumstances it's permitted. Rabbi Ami certainly says that, but our Mishnah does not give solid proof one way or another. So, but Rabbi Ami certainly does allow that. This is a short Mishnah. When we finish the Mishnah, we're going to go up to the top and take a look in the Shulchan Aruch, see how it trickles down into more of the practical Tadar Rabbana. Now, an interesting story that seems to point, well, actually, that makes the point that we want to hear. Once upon a time, a fire broke out in the courtyard of Yossi ben Simai. Who was Yossi ben Simai? Well, as we'll see, he was someone that was karov lemalchut. He was in the employ of the government. Uvo anshe gistra shel tzipori lechabot, and men came from the Roman garrison or fortress to put out the fire. He was an appointee of the king or the governor. So all these folks come running over from the Roman garrison. I believe this is Roman. I may be wrong, but I think Fashikin. You know what? Maybe this was in Bavel. Pardon my ignorance here. No, this is Roman.
Oh, Tzipori.
Right. Tzipori. So we're talking about Romans in Israel, in the north, right? So the folks came over from the fortress of Tzipori to put out the fire. We're gonna. Oh, we actually identified. I think that Shichin was in proximity to the north to Tzipori. They came over to help him because he was part of the government. A Yirei Shamayim, a from Jew, but he worked for the Romans, which is not unheard of. And he says, guys, I got to stop you. It's Shabbat. And on Shabbat, we don't put out fire. They were Gentiles. He didn't ask them to do it. He told them to stop, which obviously is not consistent with the Mishnah, which says you don't need to say anything. But here's the nice part of the story. A miracle transpired. The Yardu, Gesham, and V'chibu, and rain started falling and the fire went out. And so his frumkeit ends up paying off and it ends up working out for him. Nice story. They get to live happily ever after. Le'erev, in the evening, Shigar l'chol echad yam shtei slaim. All the firefighters received a financial gift from Yosef ben Simai. He gave them a tip. And to their governor or to their general or whatever you call it, to the head of to their chief, he sends 50 chamishin. He sends 50 coins to express his gratitude for coming on down.
But Rabbi, it's
Hold on, hold
exactly
on,
what
hold on, hold on,
it says not to do.
hold on. I'm sorry.
But this is exactly what the Mishnah says not to do.
Exactly. So take a look. We're not done yet. We're still reading. When the sages heard about the story, Amru, for your firmkeit, this was unnecessary. Shari Shanino, because as Rebbe just pointed out, this is inconsistent with our Mishnah. Goy a Gentile comes to put out your fire. Don't tell them to put it out. We don't need to tell them to stop. And so this supports further the opinion of Rabbi Ami. Does it? No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. No, this is a case where the Mishnah is implemented, or the teaching of the Mishnah is asserted in a case where somebody did not act in accordance to the Mishnah. The commentaries point out that Yossi Bar Simai was not trying to be he didn't think that he must stop them. He understood that he was in a precarious situation. You know, when Joe Lieberman or a person that wears a kippah in the government does something on Shabbos, there's a massive spotlight and people think it's their right to talk about, did he do right? Did he do wrong? He walked, he did. It's very uncomfortable to be in the public spotlight, and people don't always understand the nuance of the decision-making that a person makes. I'm not saying giving a hechsher to any one individual, but I'm just saying it's very hard to be in the limelight. And Yosef of our Gemara, Ben Simai, understands that, and he knows that if they end up putting out the fire, people are just going to assume he hit the red button. He called the hotline and said, "Send over your men," and the appearance is going to be that he allowed the fire to be put out, or he actually instructed them to put out the fire. And so for Kavod Shabbat, he went the extra mile. Here we can see it over here. Lo amar mishum iser Shabbos. Efshar dehava gam yod leike isur kedemasik. It's plausible that Yosef knew the halacha. The ein sarach lomer al techabe elo mishum kol Shabbat be'alma hechmer asma. Maybe he did it to be extra from. Ukidei shelo yachshedu shu amar lehem kabei v'kam. Maybe Yosef understood that the Jewish tabloids are much more ruthless than any other, and he felt that it was necessary to go above the law and beyond the law so as to not incite a mob of religious indignance against him.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I'm sorry to be difficult today. The message that a kid would get from this story is the opposite.
Why?
Here he is, he defied the Mishnah, and rain came. Being rewarded.
Yeah, he is being rewarded. I think we can celebrate a person that's willing to sacrifice, while also clarifying the halacha. I think this text is actually perfect. It tells us that there was somebody who went above and beyond, and for him it worked out. But this is not common practice. I believe that's what we should make of this.
We also see that there's, he also followed the saying of, if you're going to, anybody who's going to put out the fire will not lose money. Even though they didn't put out the fire, you still send them money. There's a combination of both
Interesting
things here.
I'm not sure about that, but that's an interesting consideration. You're saying he's establishing that it is economically a good idea to show up. If there's ever a fire, they're going to want to show up because they know there's going to be very lavish tips spread. Now, I want to show you the Ben Yoyada, who, again, this is a very interesting story. And I want to actually point out that obviously I embellished by saying that he wanted to avoid a mob of religious indignation. That was my commentary. That's certainly not exactly inferred in the text of the Gemara. It was based on my reading of the Maharsha, who says that people would assume that he told them to do so. Why did he pay them if they didn't actually render any services? So the Ben Yehoyada asked that question, gives a cute answer, an obvious answer we relate to. A Jew in a secular society who understands that we have to many times act above and beyond to bring respect to the Jewish people. So why did he pay them? So they shouldn't think that the reason why he told them let the fire burn is he didn't want to pay the price. He didn't want it to cost him anything. He He thought they'll be able to put out themselves. And otherwise he'd have to pay them. Therefore he sent money to them. To show them that this was an expression. Hold on, we're hearing something.
Alan.
Here, I muted them, it's fine. Again, everyone is muted. Please unmute if you would like to ask a question, but keep the mute on if we have background conversations. He sent them the payment to show them that he didn't tell them not to do the work, simply to avoid having to tip them. He understood that the rain was a miracle. He didn't want to have economic benefit from a miracle. He sent off the money because if not for him stopping them, they would have put it out the fire. There's a principle that you don't want to earn, you don't want to make money, you don't want to derive economic benefit from a miracle. Why did he pay them so nicely? So they shouldn't think that he was looking for an insurance payout, or maybe he was comfortable letting the king's property be burnt. And so he paid a lot to show that this is not a fire that he arranged to get at the king or to get an insurance payout or whatever. And again, this is obviously a text from the Ben Ish Chai, the Ben Yoyada, that should be flagged and studied by folks in the modern age.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I can't let stuff slip by just like that. You can't have benefit economically from a miracle? Why not?
There's a virtuous principle that one should not, that the Ben Yoyada is expressing, that they don't want to have monetary gain from a miracle.
Okay, don't
you know why not? Probably
Probably
because they didn't want to have a deduction of their schar in Shamayim, and the sense was that if Hashem has to intervene to send you a few bucks, if your account is on empty and Hashem transfers, well, then it's going to cost you from somewhere.
Anyway, so I don't accept that that's a throwaway line. I think there's much to be thought about that.
I have a different problem. If the property, if Ben Yodaya says that the property belongs to the king.
No. In those days, it was a more complicated relationship where usually people have to give a certain amount of yield or whatever. But if I read the Ben Yoyada, or if I understand the Ben Yoyada, you're just saying, if you would not be eager to salvage it, the impression would be, the tabloids would write that, oh yeah, you know why he wasn't eager to save it? Because it wasn't his own property, it was the king's property. And again, as a Jew who's a steward of government property, he is going above and beyond to show extra responsibility and care for those items. And I think this is a very interesting case study for, again, a Jew in public affairs or whatever. And this is certainly a very interesting Gemara, and especially the commentary about it, about the spotlight on a Jew in government, and how we have to, I don't know if the word is have to, but if one wants to avoid the appearance of impropriety and they seek to create a Kiddush Hashem, Yosef ben Simai sets the bar quite high. Would you agree to that?
Rabbi, do you want to let it pass, or do you want to deal with benefiting from a miracle?
If you have something concrete to share, please share it.
Okay, so if we look at Yetzias Mitzrayim, there's the story that we left with all the wealth of the Egyptians.
You know what the difference is?
Did we not benefit from that miracle?
There, Hashem, it was part of the package. Hashem said you're going to benefit from the wealth. They had no right not to take it. Then it was part of the plan. Good answer.
I think that's, if somebody benefited from a miracle, it would make him more Yiras Shamayim than before.
No, to see the miracle should make you have more Yiras Shamayim. But to then try to cash in on the miracle, that's low. He didn't want to cash in on a miracle. He didn't want to be really, I'll tell you really what I understand from the Ben Yada. He didn't want to retroactively make the miracle all about him earning or saving a few bucks. And so he felt that by taking those savings and passing them on, retroactively, he was expressing that he didn't want or hope or express his frumkeit simply to save a few dollars.
No, I don't have the problem from the story. I have the problem from the comment whether it was a given that every nest where somebody benefits is.
It doesn't say every
correct.
nest. It said he did not want to benefit from a miracle. So it's somewhere, it's middle ground. It's not saying that no one is allowed to benefit from a miracle. It's saying that he did not wish to have economic gain from a situation which he kind of compelled. That's really the thing. Here, what happened was they came to put out the fire. He opened his big mouth and said, no, don't put out the fire. Hashem did a miracle. So,
Rabbi, in this economy, if we survive, it'll be a miracle.
anyways, yep. I was thinking for some kind of joke where the gas tank filled up automatically, but it didn't go.
What I don't understand about this, I believe in miracles, but if a house is on fire, 90% of the homes that get on fire, it's from inside out.
Alan, where did the fire start? Did you notice? It didn't start in his house. It started b'chatzero, in his courtyard. So it seems like also it was maybe less of a devastating fire than if it was in his house.
Okay, so if it's a courtyard, then I can understand the rain falling.
Yeah.
But if it's the house, I mean, the rain can't put it out.
I think you're saying that if rain puts out the fire on your home's already ruined by the rain.
One of the two.
As we've discussed many times, whatever the fire doesn't destroy, the water from the fire department destroys.
That's right.
And especially, or the sprinkler systems today, one of the problems with the sprinkler systems is they have very dirty water.
But
and so
Rabbi, my guess would be that they were not completely helpless. They probably had reservoirs of a bit of water in certain places.
Yeah.
I mean, the fire was nothing new to them.
Yep. All right, let's see a little more. I happen to think this is a very interesting story. And if we wanted to talk about, well, I said already, if you want to talk about a Jew in the public eye, I think this would be a very interesting segment of the Talmud to highlight in such a lecture or presentation. We're going to read this, and then we're going to take a look at the Code of Jewish Law. And looking at the clock, we'll run out of time. What about a kid? Now we're talking about a Gentile. But the Mishnah then says a kid is a different story. We do not allow the kid to put out the fire. Or alehem. A Jew is responsible to oversee and encourage Shabbos observance of their children, even under bar mitzvah. Shabbos mina, from here we can infer, if you have a kid who eats unkosher items, Bezdin mitzuvin olav rishai. Or the Gemara, actually, do we understand from here that the Bezdin has a responsibility to enforce kosher consumption among children? Rashi, and this would be a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion in Yavamis that says to the effect that you do not need to enforce kosher among children. So is the Bezdin responsible to appoint somebody to drive around town telling kids that are eating cheeseburgers to throw it out because you're a Jewish kid and that's not kosher? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Gemara says no. We're talking here about the katan ha'isel das aviv, a child who is eating or putting out the fire, let's say, with his father's knowledge. Rashi, the katan sheyada lahavchin shakibo zenoich laviv ha'isel b'shvilai. He knows that his father wants the fire to go out, and he's doing it as an agent of his father. The kavasag abigoy, and the same thing would be true about a Gentile, that you're not allowed to allow a Gentile to put out the fire. Or I should say, the kavasag abigoy, the kavid ladatu yisro mishori. So the Gemara answers, there's actually a big difference. A child, or let's back, I'm sorry. Is one allowed to let a Gentile do it if it's on behalf and to benefit the a Jewish person? So the Gemara answers, there's a very important distinction between a minor child putting out a fire for his father and a Gentile. Even if both of them infer that it's good for the father, but without being instructed to do so. But a child, if they understand that they're a proxy for the father has to tell them, stop. You think I want this? I actually don't want this, because my religion, my faith is more important than the fire that's happening over here. But a Gentile, they ultimately are doing it for their own benefit. Rashi, even if he knows that it's good for the Jew, he knows that if he puts out this fire, there's going to be a handsome tip waiting for him after Shabbos. And so
I think a child can assume the same thing.
I'm sorry?
I think a child can assume the same thing.
No, the difference is because the child assumed a child's interests are usually naturally aligned with the father. They may get a prize for it, but a child, as Rashi actually points out, it's an interesting Rashi. Here. We're talking about a child that has a certain degree of maturity, that he understands that his father needs it, and he's doing it for him. So, and in general, this is a very interesting discussion. The Rambam talks about it famously, about what motivates a child to do something. And at a very young age, it's for candies, for affirmation, for presents. But there is a certain stage where a child has a degree of awareness, a degree of maturity. And at such a stage, the kid, even though he's not being instructed, because a kid is considered an extension of his father halachically and generally speaking, so the father has to stop him. If the kid is doing it on behalf of his father, with assuming there's a wink and a nod, the father has to say, don't do that. I'd rather it all burn down than you break Shabbos. And can you imagine what a learning lesson? Just imagine you're trying to convey to your child how important Shabbos is to you. This kind of moment, if a person has the ability to do so, could you imagine what kind of learning, teachable moment that would be?
I personally am not looking forward to it.
You'd rather not have the fire and not teach your child that. I understand. I agree. But if the father doesn't stop the kid, the father wants him to do that. Whereas the Gentile, he knows the father, he knows the Jew, the neighbor, the guy wants it, but he's really motivated by his own reward that he'll receive afterwards. And so there is a greater degree of separation between the act of the fire being put out by a Gentile. And the only reason why we're talking about a Gentile, obviously, is because a Jew, you're not allowed to let a Jew put out a fire for you, an adult Jew either. All right, we're going to skip that. So now let's go back to the Mishnah and we'll take a look at the Code of Jewish Law, who talks about what and how and when a Gentile can put out a fire. It's going to look familiar. Nachri Shabbat lechabot, ein tzarich limchot biyado. A Gentile who wants to put out the fire, you don't need to stop him. Aval katan Shabbat lechabot, tzarich limchot biyado. But a child who's putting out the fire, you got to stop him. And interestingly, the Ber Heitev points out, in the name of earlier authorities, that even if the guy is someone on your staff, so here we have the Mishnah Brura quotes our Gemara. Eino Yehudi adata the nafshei kavod, afilo yedei shenoich la Yisrael, kula nos atzim miskaven, sheyedei shelo yasid.
Rabbi, didn't we say we let the Jewish child extinguish it?
No.
Hey,
Stop him. Now here's interesting. The Mishnah Brura seems to say something I think different than our Gemara. Katan Shabbat lechabos. The Shulchan Aruch says the child comes to put it out. Sarach limchos, you got to stop him. So I read to your Rashi, who says that Katan sheyodeya lehavchin shenoyach le'aviv. He knows it's good for his father. But interestingly, Mishnah Berurah says, "Afilu katan shelo higia lechinuch." Even a child who, for whatever reason, the parents, not for whatever reason, they're young enough that they are not generally being urged to observe all of the mitzvot because they're still young. You still need to stop them. Here, let's see the Mishnah Berurah's language, and then we'll move on. The katan ein lo shikol hadas lasois adate dinafshe. The child does not have the emotional intelligence to do something purely on their own behalf. And so even if the kid will tell you, oh, I'm doing it for myself, the halacha understands, he's doing it for his father. He knows his father would be happy about this, and he does it on his behalf. A Jewish person not only needs to keep Shabbos, but anybody who's in their immediate employment, staff, and family members who are immediately under their care must not desecrate Shabbos. The Ayin b'Magen Avram shekasa b'Shem Haran da'afilu man damar malacha shetzrich legufa derabanan gam kein tzarich limchais biyadai. Long story short, even the opinions that would generally be more lenient, they would also ultimately conclude that you need to stop the kid from putting out the fire. Because of the special, deep, and immediate relationship that exists between a child and his father. Well, there you have it. Do you think the Rambam agrees? He quotes literally our Mishnah. Looks like the Rambam has a more lenient viewpoint when it comes to the children. This is if he's doing it on his father's behalf. If he's doing it in an independent capacity, the Beis Din is not mandated to stop him. So mostly the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch quote essentially our...
Rabbi, go back to the screen, please, where you were.
The Rambam?
No, right before. It says we allow the child to extinguish the fire. I'm not nuts.
Where?
We don't stop him. You were just there. However, right? No, go right there.
Rambam?
If a Jewish child comes to extinguish a fire, they do not...
I pointed it out to you. This is the Rambam. Midas Atzma you're talking about? Ein Beis Din Mitzulam Frishay? No, read it like this. They don't listen to him and allow him to extinguish it. He may not put it out. This is, by the way, this is the ever important exercise of learning how to read English in yeshivish. You have to read the English. That's the challenge of reading an English translation. You have to read it with the Gemara punctuation. Again, you see this?
That's why we're not sure we save English translations in the fire.
If a Jewish child comes to extinguish the fire, they don't listen to him and don't allow him to extinguish it, even though he's not obligated to, because this is actually a brilliant, thank you for pointing out, this is a brilliant chance to point out how you have to, and that's one of the problems that yeshivish people have in society, is the Gemara it's not just a limud of the Gemara. You start talking, that's where yeshivish comes from. Yeshivish isn't simply a fusion of English and Talmudic and Yiddish. It's a fusion of English, Yiddish, and Talmudic language, but it's not just the vocabulary, it's also the syntax and the
melody.
Melody, and you have to... Thank you, don't stop. All right, so that concludes today's Gemara. We studied a Mishnah talking about if, when, and how a proxy who's not obligated to keep Shabbos may or may not put out fire. Long story short, a Gentile mustn't be told or asked to put out the fire, needn't be stopped. And we even learned that you're allowed to put out a reward so long as it's the Gentiles' option to seize it or not. We read the fascinating story of a Jew in the government's employment, an appointee of the king, a steward of government resources. Fire breaks out, and the fire department is sent over. He does not let them put out the fire, although the halacha does not compel such frumkeit. A miracle happens as a result, and he shows the world he isn't cheap by compensating those volunteers anyways. We had the fascinating conversation of why he did that, and the most obvious answer, or the simple answer, is to show the Gentile responders that he wasn't not wanting them to do it out of cheapness. And also, maybe people would assume that it was government property. And so he wanted to show everyone he's not looking to save money. He was simply avoiding the appearance of impropriety, Jewish impropriety, as the Marsha, I think, pointed out, where people would assume, no, Rashi, where people would assume that he instructed them to put out the fire on Shabbos. A child, however, is a different story. A child, even if he's not obligated in mitzvot, his actions are directly associated halachically to the father, and the father must stop him. The Rambam, interestingly, adds some more room for flexibility for a child that does not, he's not yet at the age of education, and as well a child who's doing it on his own behalf. Maybe it's another child, not the father's child. The Rambam seems to, or actually the Gemara seems to indicate there's less of a responsibility of the Bezdin to insist on stopping it, because the child's not obligated in the observance of Shabbos, and it's not being done directly as a proxy for the father. That stays Gemara. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all for making this as enlightening and interesting as ever.
Rabbi,
Yes.
there's a famous Jewish expression. I mean, Jewish language, Hebrew, Yiddish is such a unique experience.
What is that?
The saying is that I had a big fight with my wife. I threw her down the stairs, the keys to the car.
Yep. Exactly. All right, shkayach, everyone.
Okay, Shakar.
Shkoyach. Good class.
That's why we say Baruch Shepatrani.